My guests this week are Perry Shao and Phil Nobile Jr. Perry is a musician, Grammy-nominated album designer, and a t-shirt collector legend who lives in Philadelphia. Phil is the editor-in-chief of Fangoria magazine. He's also an Emmy-winning writer-producer who has executive produced the acclaimed 2019 documentary Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. He's been a massive fan of Phantom of the Paradise since he first rented it on VHS 41 years ago. And it is my great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Perry Shao and Phil Nobile Jr. Hi, everybody.
Hello. Hello. Thanks for having us.
Phil, you saw this on VHS 41 years ago.
Well, no, you gotta imagine 41 years ago, it was even before the video store age. Like when you wanted to rent a video in 1983, you went to like the camera store, right? And I've had cause to think about this lately, and that camera store had about 20 tapes on the shelf. And I'd say about half of those movies are formative experiences for me, expressly because I rented them off of that shelf, like Badlands, Pacino's Scarecrow was on that shelf. There was those puffy boxes from Warner Brothers. So It's Alive was on there, but Phantom of the Paradise, the box was on there, and it called to me, and I rented it, and clearly I'd never seen anything like it, and it left a mark on me that has yet to be washed away.
Perry, what about you? Where did you discover the film?
So I love telling this story. We had like an illegal cable box when we got cable. And so we would get like completely random channels. We didn't get to pick. Like for like half of the year, we would just have like HBO, and then it would just go away. And then like we'd never have Comedy Central, so I would miss all this stuff. But we would get some, those movie channels. I would just maybe USA and something like that. And I would stay up super late, and my parents let me watch whatever I wanted for whatever reason. They trusted me, I guess. I wasn't like a bad kid, but I guess they could trust me because I wasn't going to get into real trouble. But so I would just stay up late, and I would watch, you flip through the channels until you find something appealing as a little kid. And I'm flipping through the channels, and I see, I don't even remember specifically the first scene I saw, but you can imagine any of them would have been enough for me to be like, what is this movie? And so I had to go and get the TV guide, and I had to like look through like, what's today? Okay, what time is it? What channel is this? Okay, well, if it's that channel on this TV guide, whatever our bootleg version is, I had to know what channel that was. And I would look, and it'd be like Phantom of the, and it would just stop because the only fits so much. And for so long, I would randomly see it on TV, and I would catch it in different parts, to the point where eventually I was like, I think I've seen this entire movie just from catching it late at night throughout my life. And then I'm sleeping over a friend's house in high school, on a school night, which we were never allowed to do, but for some reason he lived down the street, and we were staying up late, and I see that Phantom of the Paradise. At this point, I like remembered the name, especially when I saw it was about to come on. At this point, there's like TV. The guide is like the one that scrolls on the TV. We didn't have that, but this is how much time had passed. And so I said, hey guys, I know you're going to fall asleep, but like I'm staying up. I have to watch this movie from the beginning to end because I've never seen it straight through. And at this point, I had probably seen the movie in some capacity, like in parts, like 5 times or so, as a kid, and never being able to get the whole thing. So I stayed up all night and I watched the whole thing, and it was so mind-blowing already every time I caught it. I immediately fell in love with Paul Williams. I immediately wanted to I just thought this is the coolest guy ever, and Brian DePalma and stuff. And after that, it was like I tracked down a copy on VHS, and I had to show like as many friends as I can this movie. And it's basically been like that since, to a point where even up until a couple of years ago, every year on my birthday would just invite a select amount of friends, and just to have pizza and watch this same movie every year, which was Phantom of the Paradise. And it introduced it to so many of my friends who had never heard of it. They didn't even know who Paul Williams was, or they it just blew so many people's minds. It makes me so happy to do that.
Yeah, it's incredible. Both of you mentioned things that were really pivotal to me. A, the limited amount of video choices at wherever you could get it. Rent the Machine. They'd have like one music documentary, 2 comedies, 3 action, and you're like, you just watched whatever was put in front of you. And sometimes it was so random, but also staying over at a friend's house, watching movies, monster movies. The first gore thing I ever saw was Monty Python's parody of Sam Peckinpah when they're doing Salad Days. So my first ultra-violence moment was seeing, just something I didn't know what it was referring to. And people are laughing at it on TV. And that also freaked me out. But a big part of me discovering this film was I was a Famous Monster kid. And they had a section where they would say, name this film. And they would put a black and white photograph. And I remember they had a picture of the band The Undead from this film where they're painted, half black and white and these really geometric faces. And just staring at that photo being like, he's holding a microphone. So it's a music thing, but it's a horror thing, and not being able to put it together, and it not telling you what the film was, of course, till you got the next issue. And what was so funny about having you on here, Phil, is, I was into Famous Monsters before Fangoria came out. And then when Fangoria came out, it was like, I'm too scared to even touch the magazine because the covers of it were so intense. And then I remember Famous Monsters all of a sudden having to chase Fangoria. Like, we're putting Jason on the cover. We're putting Freddy. It was like, there was no more Korolev. There was no more Lugosi. Fangoria completely wiped the slate of it. So it's really, I'm tickled that we're all here and we all have these kind of, similar touchstones.
Yeah. A constant debate I'm having with old time readers of Fangoria was that in 2023, they want to know why Freddy and Jason aren't on the cover. I'm like, well, Fangoria was about what's new back then. Right. And like you say, kind of like it wiped Karloff and Lugosi off the face of the magazine shelves at the time. And I'm trying to let them know that Fango is about new horror. We do go retro once in a while, but.
We were talking the other day about like Ken Russell films and, this film from Brian DePalma and these kind of like psychedelic musicals. This is kind of like the beginning of the end of it a little bit. And none of them did very well, but if you look at Brian De Palma's early work, it's like Hi Mom or Greetings or Get to Know Your Rabbit with was it Tommy Smothers, right? So tonally different than this. Do you know much about why Brian De Palma wanted to make this film?
I don't know like the lore of why specifically he wanted to make this particular film, but I do know that he was very like, I think if you watch this back to back with Sisters, it makes a little more sense organically because he starts to dive into like his real homage kind of period, and there's so much homage in this film, not just to like the source material like Faust and Phantom of the Opera, but the Hitchcock and the split screens kind of. Well, Sisters was maybe the start of the real split screen obsession, but he starts to really play with it here. But to me, it was a cinematic sandbox for him to like really kind of stretch in ways that we maybe hadn't seen him do to that degree yet. And he explodes from here into Carrie and whatnot. But I think he was more not style over substance, but style was equal of equal importance to him as the substance of the film. And the substance of the film is something I'd have to parse. But to me, as I got older, what was interesting is that it's a movie. It's a very cynical movie about the music industry.
Yes. And
I think he kind of, got a little sideways kick out of that. Because as a kid, you just loved all those songs. But as you're an adult, you're like, no, Paul Williams and Brian De Palma are making fun of glam rock, and they're making fun of folkies, and they're making fun of Sha Na Na, and they're making fun of Kiss. It's two like pissed off old dudes that are watching the music scene pass them by and kind of like throwing shade at it. And I think that that's a big engine for this movie creatively.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
I was going to say, isn't there a whole thing though where this movie was being made before Kiss was, because it's in 74 or something, right?
74.
Well, okay, so wait, I think then maybe the movie was being filmed in 73, because I remember hearing this whole thing about the Kiss makeup and the movie, like kind of beating them to it, and the Swan Song Records thing, like they were working on it while they were starting the real Swan Song record label. I don't know what the real definitive timeline is.
I'm going to say this film, there's no truth in it, but I'm going to say this film completely influenced Kiss.
Oh no, not that
even if it's not true. I just like the idea of it being like Paul Stanley and Gene take that, because I want to take something away from them right now. I mean, they have people going to see their
holograms,
avatars these days. I'm like, oh yeah, I just want to be able to like, yeah, they saw a midnight movie and decided to put some makeup on. It seems fair. It is funny that the whole concept of the 70s, you know, like, I mean, Sean Enoch was at Woodstock, but in the 70s, you got American Graffiti coming up, and you've got, you know, Happy Days. The obsession with 50s culture, you know, whether it's in the UK with the live scene with like Chuck Berry and Little Richard being flown over to perform at these big outdoor festivals, is fascinating to me. And I love that the film just comes out of the gate. I love the opening track, because right away, you know, from the look of it, the sound of it, that this is just a cult film. They're not making any bones about it. It's like, this is a weirdo film. Don't confuse it with anything but. Have a good time. Whether it's the way the logo looks with the lights flashing around it, to the casting of the Juicy Fruits playing and getting in fights with people on the stage, or the song that they're performing. I think it's a really glorious kickoff to a film. One of my favorites.
You know, I think there's something like really special about all of the things that it kind of feels like, because when I was a little kid, it was like, wait, so it's kind of like Rocky Horror, but also like, you know, what I knew at the time, like Toxic Avenger or something. Like, there are all these weird things I was trying to make sense of, to figure out like, what is this, you know, Grease. I loved Grease as a kid. So it's like all these movies and Hairspray. Even my dad let me watch Hairspray when I was a kid. So like, I kind of was trying to connect it to something, but I knew that it was for me. That was it, you know?
Yeah. Well, in the 80s, you know, you still had Stray Cats and Hairspray, like you said. So it's just funny that every decade has this still kind of look back on this time. And I just think it's so funny that the band keeps shifting genres and looks, and it's like, that's not working. All right, now you're going to be like, you know, Beach Boy thing. No.
And it probably, you know, made the line producer very happy that they're just double dipping on those actors. But what a statement too, that no, these people are hollow sellouts, and they will be whatever we tell them to be. Here they are, Sha-na-na. Here they are as the Beach Boys, and here they are as, you know, Proto Kiss, let's call them.
Love it.
It's very, very interesting. And not that you said a movie starts with that, but what the other great thing when you were a kid who's watching, you know, broadcast television in the 1980s, this starts with a narration from Rod Serling, of all people.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like, which, you know, has a very specific purpose, I think. If you've got Rod Serling narrating you, I mean, and Rod Serling near the end of his life was selling his voice to, you know, candy bar commercials and anything else, and he was dead at 50. But as a cinematic device, having a Rod Serling narration, there aren't too many movies that can claim that, and I think that kind of makes it also a bit of a unicorn in that regard.
I have the narration here, if you'll indulge me.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Swan. He has no other name. His past is a mystery, but his work is already a legend. He wrote and produced his first gold record at 14, and the years since then he has won so many others that he once tried to deposit them in Fort Knox. He brought the blues to Britain. He brought Liverpool to America. He brought folk and rock together. His band, the Juicy Fruits, single-handedly gave birth to the nostalgia wave of the 70s. Now he is looking for the new sound of the spheres to inaugurate his own Xanadu, his own Disneyland, the Paradise, the ultimate rock palace. This film is the story of that search, of that sound, of the man who made it, the girl who sang it, and the monster who stole it. Now, I put a little bit of a lilt in my voice that Rod Serling definitely doesn't do. It's like total horror movie narration, but it's an incredible bit of writing just to set the tone.
It's world building, it's myth making. Like he's rewriting history right there and there, like he's telling you that there's one guy responsible for every pop music movement since Elvis, right? It's so ballsy, it's so audacious and ridiculous, and it doesn't care that it's ridiculous. Perry mentioned Rocky Horror. So in the 80s, Rocky Horror was famously unavailable on videotape for most of the decade. It was only in midnight screenings, and it was by the same studio, 20th Century Fox. And so as a kid, Rocky Horror was something my older siblings would dress up and go to, and I had no idea what it was. But when I rented Phantom of the Paradise, that's what I thought Rocky Horror was going to be until I actually saw Rocky Horror, which is actually a little bit more stage bound and not really as cinematic as Phantom of the Paradise is. So This movie kind of like ruined Rocky Horror for me to some degree, because I was like, oh, okay, it's just a campy stage musical. All right. And I like Rocky Horror, but
it was pulled from the stage to be a movie, where this film, it looks amazing, but I'm trying to remember the guy who designed it.
Jack Fisk.
Is that right? What was his name?
Jack Fisk. Perry's just laughing that I know it.
It just made me happy.
He did Eraserhead,
mm-hmm.
and he did most of Terrence Malick's films,
mm-hmm.
I believe. Such amazing set pieces. For instance, a scene where Paul Williams, who's playing Swan, is like in his little world sitting in a gold 7-inch record while deciding what genres were going to work. Like, is it going to be this soul band? Is it going to be this folk group? And it's like they disappear into the darkness. The whole thing is just full of big swings visually.
And that scene you mentioned, what I think probably took me too long to notice until I started really paying attention, is that it's against Limbo Black. That's not even a set. It's just the record. And it's just the camera going around the thing, and then judicious editing kind of making you seem like you're wiping from one thing to the next. So they when they've got a theater like the Dallas theater that they filmed this in, whose name I can't remember now, that they exploit it, but they're also not above just putting an actor in front of a black curtain for a reaction shot. And if you watch it, you'll realize how much it was just sort of like scotch taped together, I think. And the movie just carries you through all that. It's a credit to the editing of the film and just the energy of the movie, I think.
I don't want to interrupt. There's somebody working on my building that my studio is at. Can you hear all this noise or no?
I just heard it for the first time when you talked.
Yeah, I didn't know this was going to be going on.
I'm just going to say, they're putting the Phantom behind brick next door to your house. They're actually putting... That's what I'm going to go with this. I'm all over this, Perry. I'm world building here, right?
Steal it now.
I love it.
What we're going to say is any of the sound that's happening is just Winslow Leach. He's being boarded up. No, he's being bricked in to his studio for the rest of the time. It's not that bad.
I'm playing it in real time while we talk about it. So they're blocking me in with the bricks. Perfect.
That's right.
It's called method acting, I think.
Let's talk about the story of the film. You mentioned that it was, based on Faust, which is used in so many films and stories. But again, it starts with the Juicy Fruits performing, and you get a sense right away that Paul Williams, who's playing Swan, is kind of up in the balconies. No one claps after the song until he decides that they can clap. And I love that moment. I feel like the strength of that one little decision in his character just tells you everything you need to know in the rest of the film. This person's a tastemaker. He's the person that careers live and die by. What was your understanding of Paul Williams when you saw this film?
I'm a little older than you gentlemen, I think. And so Paul Williams was this ubiquitous presence in 70s television. He was a very popular presence on game shows. He was an orangutan in Battle for the Planet of the Apes. That was my White Whale Apes movie, like you were talking about, Perry. I had to look for that on the TV guide and try to be in front of the TV at 1 a.m. when it aired, because they never aired that one during Apes Week. They only aired the first four. And Paul Williams was a mainstay on a lot of talk shows. If you go on YouTube and look Paul Williams talk show, you'll find him on Johnny Carson. You'll find him in all kinds of stuff. He was kind of all over the place. But this movie was not part of the Paul Williams lore, I think, if if you missed it in its theatrical run. Like until the 80s, when I was able to rent this thing, Paul Williams was just like, he's the guy who wrote the Love Boat theme, and he's the guy who wrote the Bugsy Malone soundtrack, and he's the guy who did a bunch of songs for the Carpenters. Right. And I think he's been sober for many years now, but he was sort of infamous for being very drunk on game shows back in the day, like Match Game PM and whatnot. And he owns all that now. But yeah, so he was it was like seeing a sitcom star play a movie villain, I guess I would say, on the first viewing. The movie has since supplanted that, and now he is Paul Williams from Phantom of the Paradise in my head now, after all these years. But
yeah, I could see that, because for me, it was like my introduction to him. And then later you're like, oh, that's the person who wrote Rainbow Connection. I did not know he did the Love Boat theme. That is perfect. It makes total sense.
Smokey and the Bandit, he would just be like that guy in like movies, you know, like this was the first one I saw him in, but after that I wanted to know what else, you know. I wanted to like see everything. Of course, now I realize like I should be more selective, because he was in so many things and so many of his appearances, and like I think he was just one of those guests that talk shows would be like, oh, we need somebody, he's always good, he's funny, he's quick. He, you know, back then he was under the influence, I guess, but he was still like really brilliant, you know, in whatever he was doing. He knew how to do it.
Yeah, it's just the era of celebrity. Again, I didn't know about him till this film. Is he an actor? Is he a musician? I had no idea when I first saw it that he wrote the music. I didn't put it together. I just assumed he was just some cool, strange actor, just like, you know, William Finley, who plays Winslow Leach. Just a really interesting looking guy, full of charisma.
The voice, talking even, the voice is just like unique.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess he'd worked with him. He's in Sisters.
He's in a bunch of DePalma films, and he's like a DePalma like repertory player primarily, right? Whereas Paul Williams was sort of out in the pop culture and whatnot. I think William Finley like was just part of Brian's camp.
He's incredible in it. I guess I heard that the mask that he eventually has to wear as the Phantom, he had an allergic reaction to, which caused his eyes to get really fucked up. And through most of the film, whenever they have a close-up on him, he does look like he's going to die in that mask. He looks uncomfortable. It's quite the performance. But I haven't seen him in much outside of DePalma stuff.
Yeah, he did a lot of DePalma stuff. I believe he passed away in 2012. Okay. But just a jobber. Like you'd see him on like maybe on Columbo or something like that, or Murder, She Wrote. He was just a working actor, I believe. Although I don't have the details of his life really. But I know he was in, I want to say the Fury or Obsession, and he was in Sisters for sure, and he was in one or two before that. But you know, he was a go-to guy for De Palma.
But yeah, he comes in after the Juicy Fruits plays and plays his first solo song, which is, it's a weird ass song for a solo piano player. It's like all over the map, and obviously Swan is drawn to this.
And he's not a singer, which I think is a really interesting choice. Like he's this pure protagonist, right? Who's got this gift, and his music is so beautiful. And I think it's so interesting that De Palma let this guy sing, and he's not a good singer. And when I show this movie to people, I don't know how you feel, Perry, but that song is the hump. If I can get them to the other side of that song,
weird,
I know I've got them. Not a great performance as a song, but I think it's interesting that even though he's so clunky, and that you're almost invited to take Swan's side in terms of like, yeah, the singer's got to go.
He's like, I want the music, not the creep.
I like it. Yeah, I like it because it feels real, because he really can't sing that well, but you can hear what's there and that it's something special. And maybe because he's kind of a little loose, so to speak, or whatever, it feels more like, wow, this guy really wrote this amazing song. And it's just like a weird dude with like what does he have? Like a Beethoven Mozart sweater, I think. Something like that.
Yeah.
And
Einstein or something.
It kind of like, I understand what you mean, but I think the performance with him singing is like unreal, like weird, like haunting in a way that maybe it wasn't supposed to be, but like really amazing. I don't know. I love that.
Vulnerable.
Yeah, he's in his own head. He's in his own world. He doesn't really care what people think of his music. And it is a really, in terms of story, it is really strange too. It's like this huge crowd for the juicy fruits at this place, and then all of a sudden, everyone just goes, and he just gets to go up there and do his song. It's kind of a weird little moment in terms of, it doesn't even seem like they'd let him in the door,
Well, they
let
don't.
alone
They
be
don't
like,
a bunch of times throughout the movie.
Yeah, I know. But at the beginning, you're like, how did he get in here? Like, he must know somebody. Does his cousin work there? It just, my young mind was always working like that. But do either of you have the soundtrack?
Oh, I have like multiple copies on multiple,
of course,
formats.
So are all the songs in this movie featured on that?
But they're a little different. But on the tip of this, on the note of the soundtrack, I do think part of the reason this movie made the impression on me that it did is because in 1983, 84, I didn't have a record player. Like, I'd kind of like, records had kind of gone out, CDs didn't happen yet. I've never seen this movie on cassette, so I could never find a soundtrack. So I would just watch the fucking movie over and over again because I wanted to hear the music. I would play the VHS tape like a record, right? And I've since course corrected, and I have it on iTunes, and I have it on vinyl, and I have the CD. There's a couple of tracks. That song that he plays at the beginning, there's a very sort of clean, polished version that Paul Williams does that's on the soundtrack. That's actually pretty good, but in a way, it's a little more dated than some of the other versions of, like, the one in the movie almost, because I don't know, the production value of it is very specific to 74. It feels like when Paul Williams sings that theme. I don't, Perry, you have to jump in and tell me if there's any songs on there that aren't. There's songs that you hear portions of the movie that you thing, but that, the one where he's walking into Swan Song Records, never thought I'd get to meet the devil. That's not on the record.
Yeah, that's true. It's like almost like a clip of like they just wrote a filler bit or whatever.
Yeah. And it's Finley singing it too.
Oh yeah. Oh, that is so weird. Every song on the record I think is amazing, or on the soundtrack or whatever, but The Hell of It is the one that I always go back to, and maybe it's obvious, but like that guitar riff in the beginning is so heavy. It sounds like a Black Sabbath riff, and like somehow he goes into like an Elton John part or something, and it's just such a good song. It's crazy.
And I bet we both have like half a dozen friends in our group that are like, we got to play that at my funeral.
I've definitely tried to get my bands to cover it before. And also like, one time, this is going to sound like a weird brag, but because I was friends with Gilbert Gottfried, and he knew, like, somehow it brought up this movie, and he just went right into singing The Hell of It. Like, he just started singing it. And then we both started singing this song together. And it was this crazy moment of like, what the hell is going on right now? Also, like, how amazing is it that Gilbert also loved that movie enough that he remembered the whole song. And like, it was such you don't know who loves this movie, basically, like in the world, you don't know who's even heard of it, who has seen it. So it's really weird when it comes like creeping up on you all of a sudden. Somebody wants to talk about this movie and you're like, oh, you know what this is, because it is such a special, unique thing. Even if you only heard the soundtrack or just seen the movie and never listened to the sound, whatever, there's so many elements of it all together that just, I think, stick with people. I never met anybody who doesn't like it, who I've showed it to.
It's a film that I can play in my head.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, there's a select few of those films that I can do that with. And it just shows the power of how well, again, like you said, the editing, how, on a shoestring budget, what they're able to do, how charismatic the performances are, how many different genres of filmmaking it does. There's like sped up old-fashioned filmmaking. There's fisheye lens stuff. There's documentary style camera shooting. There's, musical numbers. It's really all over the map. Split screen. I just love that DePalma seemed to be playing with genre in almost every single scene. It doesn't repeat.
There's an assurance and a confidence to those choices, and that it still hangs together as an organic whole is sort of the miracle, I think. You know what I mean? That he's doing all these different things. They have a Swan, the scene with Swan, like you talked about. directly goofing on The Godfather, which is only 3 years earlier. It's the opening scene of The Godfather where the guy's like, "I love America," and he's begging The Godfather for something, but this guy's begging him to ruin some singer that screwed him over. Like he's just throwing everything in there. It's very, like, it's an overused term, but like the approach is very punk rock before there was punk rock.
Yeah.
And I think that's part, like, that's sort of, maybe, I don't want to speak in absolutes, but like it's Brian DePalma saying goodbye to his underground filmmaker roots, because he sort of becomes respectable after that.
The moment where we get to meet Jessica Harper for the first time standing in line to audition for Swan. I believe this is her first movie, correct?
That I know of. I can check.
Yeah, I believe it's her first lead role. And I don't know about you. I loved Jessica Harper in, Suspiria and in this film and Stardust Memories. She just got such a great face and such a kindness to her performance. Again, like Winslow, seems like kind of a nerd, kind of out of the element, being thrown into the rock thing. But I wanted to see what you thought of her performance in this film.
I think she's great. She's quickly iconic, right? Like you said, it's kind of her first role. She had one other credit before this, but she's I don't know, sometimes, and maybe it's my imagination, sometimes when you see a new actor getting an opportunity like this, you can just tell that they're going to make the most of it, that they're relishing it, and that they're doing everything they can to really nail it. And she does that. I think she's a woman character written by dudes, and I think that comes through it in certain parts. Yeah. But when she gets the floor and when they give her the mic and when she's singing, like, it's incredible. It's literally mesmerizing. Like, I can't stop. Like, both of her big numbers, Old Souls and the audition song where she special to me. It's like a star in the making, and it's kind of a sin that she didn't get bigger than she did after this movie.
I like how naturally she does this performance. Like, when you hear actors who go into an audition and they're just like, I just kicked the door open and I started just like acting like the part. I grabbed the person by their shirt, and you know what I mean? It feels like when you're watching this movie where she's only acting, I guess, kind of like she's auditioning, right? So she is kind of like that, but she just busts through, and obviously you can't avoid the hat when she takes the hat off and throws the hat. I can't avoid not bringing that up, but she really seems like she was just going for it. Yes. In real life, but also like it worked really well as the character, or it just like was so natural looking and weird in some ways, but like in an awkward, she's just going for it kind of way, I think,
Well, that's what makes it natural, is it is kind of awkward. She's doing these kind of, I mean, it's not like really outrageous steps, in her dancing, it's like, it's pretty limited, but it's so full of conviction and so in her character. And I love that everybody around her is kind of like, whoa, like the people in the audition, everyone's just like, yeah, all right, look at this star, that seems like it would have been a really hard role to play, to find the kind of heart in that character. Again, like you said, I just think she's totally hypnotic in it.
Yeah. There's the thing on paper of like, I'll do anything I have to do to get this part. But if you put like Stockard Channing in there or somebody hard, it wouldn't have worked. She had to have that softness and that vulnerability. And I don't know if her dance moves were interpreted so uncharitably back in '74, but they might have just ripened a little bit in the time that passed. But yeah, she's perfect in the part. I can't really imagine another person in that role.
No, I mean, it's same with her in Suspiria too. I can't imagine anyone else going through the terror and the torment, except her. I don't know. There's something like you lean into her a bit. She adds a trust in the film, for the first time in a way, because there's all this power plays and you just know, I mean, the ending already, it's not going to end well. She kind of grounds it in a way where you're like, well, maybe it'll have a happy ending. Maybe, they seem to like each other, you know. So,
A glimmer of hope.
and then he's of course kicked out, and this was the part when I first saw it that I fell in love with the film. Was he's beat up, thrown out, and they plant drugs on him. They arrest him. They put him in prison. That prison scene, like, well, first the courthouse scene where it's like a giant American flag behind him, and he just turns, and it's just a really weird angle. And he's like, "I'm innocent," you know. He's just, "I've been framed," and
screenshotted that like 20, like 15 years ago, and just had to have that shot available to me at any time. I used it on a flyer before.
It's so amazing.
Yeah.
Most beautiful shots in the whole movie, and there's a lot of them, but that one is just like, wow. It feels like a poster for America or something, like the horror.
And it dovetails so perfectly with the same kind of aggressive camera work of the cops, because it's his right. point of view, and the cops are like, "What's that he got in his purse?" And you know, they're the camera's fixed, but they go from like being background characters being very in here, all in one, you know, because of the lens choice, and then it smashes into that judge going life, and then hitting the gavel, and it's beautifully laid out.
The film often is at Winslow's level, like in his face, like when he's on the ground, when he's crawling, wherever. He's rarely shot from far away. It's like really close up. That really made an impression on me because, you know, even at a young age, I was like, something's being said here. And then he's in prison making tiddlywinks at, you know, on an assembly line. Also, as a kid, was like, all right, this film that I've kind of been really believing in and buying into the mythology here. Because, you know, when you're young, you don't know what level of importance to put on things. You're like, maybe this is a bigger world view than I know. Maybe there's some truth in here. By the time I got to the tiddlywink conveyor belt thing, I was like, okay, they're having fun. You know, like, you don't need to take this so seriously. This is like really funny. You can laugh with the film, you know, instead of making it so reverent.
Yeah. My understanding is that was actually a toy factory owned by the producers. Pressman had a toy company, and so that's how that ended up in the film. But again, it's an opportunity that becomes a beautifully organic choice for what you're watching, as you just sort of demonstrated about like that moment, what that did for you as you were watching it, I think is so magical.
The Mask was, you know, the first thing I saw on a VHS tape was that, and already it was just imprinted on my mind. So powerful, so cool looking, so weird, and just had an element of danger to it. Did the style of this movie or that mask, have you ever played into that with any of the art you've had to make?
I mean, I definitely watch it a lot. I definitely look at the memorabilia a lot. I have probably referenced, you know, I've used imagery from it, or I've drawn it for flyers and stuff, but I don't think anything like too literal, because I think also it's so buried in my like it's just part of my brain at this point that I'm sure I've been influenced and inspired by it enough to do something with it or whatever, but nothing off the top of my head besides I have these two. I have an original T-shirt from the Phantom of the Paradise.
Of course you do.
I actually have two of them, and I had a third that I gifted to somebody, but I've been luckily finding them, and I tweeted at Paul Williams and asked him, like, what's the story with this shirt? Because I imagine there wasn't a lot, and he pretty much said like they were made for promo and for cast and crew and stuff like that, but there weren't a ton of them made, probably.
Right.
But seeing the VHS art, kind of like what you all said as a kid, it was just crazy. It didn't look like any other movie.
And Phil, being a horror movie fan, I'm sure collecting horror memorabilia is a big part of your life too. I mean, it seems like the people I know who are into horror, there's a reason why people are all of a sudden have a giant Mandy weapon in their house. You know, they just want it. They want to live it. You know, they want to hold it. How did you come about getting your own copy of The Mask?
Well, it was early internet days for me, and I think like the early years of eBay. And I was just typing random things into eBay, and I was typing Planet of the Apes this into eBay, and I was typing James Bond that. And then I was like, I wonder if anybody ever made a Phantom of the Paradise helmet. And I searched eBay, and I found this. I don't know its origin story. I don't know what country it's from or where it came from. It wasn't too expensive. It's very handmade. You can sort of see like the unfinished fiberglass inside this thing. Like that's there. They just sort of glued a little sunglass lens into it. And it's been on my shelf for 24 years. But there have since been like more high-end things made from Japanese manufacturers that are kind of like display pieces and not considered to be wearable and whatnot. And Japanese, you talked about Perry being inspired by the art. There was a hot minute online where Phantom wasn't streaming anywhere, and there hadn't been like a proper Blu-ray release or DVD release. And there was a very specific demographic where if you showed a picture from Phantom of the Paradise, the kids would all say, "Oh, it's femto." Which is some kind of Japanese manga character, very directly inspired by Winslow's helmet.
That's unreal.
And in terms of collecting, aside from the helmet, I don't know what else. Like maybe if I got a screen accurate plunger, I would feel complete. That could do it for me. But a couple of months ago, William Finley's family put his costume up for auction, and it was the original costume. And there was some debate about whether the helmet was authentic or not. But basically, everybody in my sphere was like, "Oh well, Guillermo del Toro's going to buy that." And it was like a foregone conclusion. It was an auction; anybody could bid, but everyone was like, "Guillermo's getting that," and he, in fact, he got it.
Wow.
So on his house.
I love the homemade feeling of all the costumes. They got like creative, but like in a way that you would probably like maybe Jim Henson did when he first started. Like I'll use ping pong balls for the eyes. Oh, that's a good idea. Like that's what it feels like the costumes were, but in a way that like it makes it more believable.
Yes.
I can believe that somebody made this. I really don't believe that somebody made like the Batman costume with the nipples or something. Like who's molding that? Like Alfred doesn't have the strength or time to do that. So like in Phantom of the Paradise, it's just straight up like theater costume closet. I love that.
And there's no Star Wars, so there's no creature shops, and there's nobody specializing in this in 1974. There's not even a Star Wars yet. So it's all very handmade, and I think that makes it more special and more, compelling to want to see and touch and be near. I've seen a few fan-made Phantom of the Paradise costumes, like at the Mahoning Drive-In when they had a screening there and whatnot. And they're all made with passion and love. It's really interesting.
Well, you did that article for Fangoria about traveling to Canada, to a city that's just obsessed. The film is baked into the culture of that.
Right.
It almost feels like everybody has to have made a costume in that town.
You would think, but I will say this, and I mean this. I don't mean any disrespect or anything to the people of Winnipeg, but to give your readers your listeners a little bit of background. In 1974, Phantom of the Paradise bombed everywhere in the world except for Paris and Winnipeg. And no one knows why it played for months and months in Winnipeg, but every 12-year-old in Winnipeg went and saw every show every day. They kept this one theater in business. And those 12-year-olds are now 60-year-old people who still live and breathe Phantom of the Paradise. Winnipeg is home to Swanage, as far as I know, the world's only Phantom of the Paradise cover band. The lead singer is a forklift driver by day, and at night he sings all the songs. And what my experience was with the fans in Winnipeg was sort of what Perry was describing about the secret handshake thing. I was in the city, and I brought this with me because I wanted to take pictures of the fans with it, because I didn't want to assume they had their own helmets, right? So for the article, I wanted to have like portraits of them holding the helmet. And because the occasion was there was a documentary made about these fans. It's called Phantom of Winnipeg. I went there, and I'm in the hotel lobby, and a policeman who's maybe 35 years old eyeballs me from across the lobby, and he beelines toward me, and I think like I'm going to be in trouble for something. And he goes, "I need a picture with that." And like he takes the helmet, and I take the picture, and he gives me his email address, and I send him the picture. A homeless person who was very much in the throes of some kind of addiction staggered into this bar where we were all gathered, and she looked at someone's Phantom of the Paradise shirt and started singing "Life at Last," and it was because her dad watched it over and over again. So you're seeing all walks of life in Winnipeg, like bros in hockey jerseys, housewives, all manner of folks who just had it all in their DNA because of that 1974 screening, or their mom or their big sister or somebody had gone to the 74 screening and it was burned into their brains forever. It's a singular occasion. And Winnipeg is doing special 50th anniversary screenings where some of the stars are going to go to. And they sold out in like 5 minutes.
Wow.
Like, they fill the theater every time there's something Phantom of the Paradise related in Winnipeg. And I think I got into it a little bit in the article, but like really nobody knows why this happened.
Yeah. That's incredible. That's the part is like, I was like, oh, there's gotta be an explanation. There's no explanation.
And there's no explanation and there's no analog. Like in Bisbee, Arizona, they're not super into shock treatment. You know what I mean? Like there's no other town movie relationship like this. And it defies explanation. And I think it's just amazing. And I literally dragged my ass up to Winnipeg because I was so fascinated by this story and I wanted to write about it and I wanted to meet these people and spend time with them. And I'm still friends with them because they maybe they less than me, but I feel like I'm one of them. I feel like these are my people. These are the ones who get it.
I mean, what was that screening like? Was it different than you thought it was going to be? Were they quiet? Were they singing along? Was it interactive? What was the vibe?
They were singing. They were clapping at like names on the screen. They would clap when somebody would enter the frame. They were very engaged. It wasn't Rocky Horror. Like they didn't have a script of call and response, but this was their thing that they loved more than anything. I sort of followed a woman around who was instrumental in sort of a Phantom of the Paradise reunion that happened in 2006 with the cast. And I watched her watch the movie 3 times in 24 hours.
Wow.
Because they would screen the film and then the documentary about them. And so, yeah, she did not miss a screening. If it was playing on a screen that she could get to, then it was a foregone conclusion that she would be at that screening.
Well, we'd like to say hello to our sponsor, Winnipeg. Thank you for sponsoring this episode.
Shout out to Winnipeg. Shout out to Doug and Gloria.
I wonder if it was like one of those things where, you know how if a band that wasn't from the U.S. made it big in the U.S. because some DJ in some random town, like Rush, it blew up from, I think, Cleveland because there was just this one DJ who wanted to put it on or whatever. And it was like all it needed to start catching on. Like, was there somebody who was like the projectionist in Winnipeg who was just like, I'm just going to keep playing this movie for another week. And then after that, it was like more people saw it and then more people saw it. And they kept, I mean, there has to be some person who was like keeping it into the public's like so they would see it. Or
well, I would say it's more likely that it was some sort of regional publicist who figured out how to aim it at the kids. And you know, I think if I was getting a little high-minded or flighty about it, I said, because it opened at Christmas time, right, in 74. So it's winter into Winnipeg. Winter in Winnipeg. It's not even winter in Philly. So it's these kids living this gray, cold, kind of colorless existence, and then you show them that, right? It's not like McCabe and Mrs. Miller or you know, even like Dirty Harry. It is the most colorful, incredibly audio visual experience they've probably ever seen. And maybe if Tommy had hit that winter for them, it would have been a different story. But I think it was like a time and place thing, but I'm guessing.
I mean, think about how the film hit us. You know, it's just like time and place. It was what we needed. It stood out from everything else. And we were young. And even things, like I said, Ken Russell and other things that were creeping in when I got older, I couldn't hold the torch to it, you know. I think part of the reason is a lot of the films, like, you know, like look at Tommy, it's kind of a mess. It's glorious, but there's scenes you're like, that scene with Tina Turner is amazing. Or that scene, you know, with the baked beans is incredible. But
why is Jack Nicholson in here?
Yeah, but it's overly long and it drags and it doesn't have necessarily all the spirit that this film has. This film just knows how to keep moving. It's really fun. I could imagine if I would have seen this in a movie theater, you know, as a teenager, not knowing anything about it, it would have caved my head in.
Yeah. I got to interview Paul Williams about it when that documentary was happening, and his theory was that he was a sort of a soft androgynous sex symbol that a 12-year-old girl could feel safe being attracted to, and he thought that was a big part of it for him.
Interesting, because he's such a creep in the film.
He's a creep, right? Like I'm like, are they? I'm not sure they're going for you, but you know,
there is that scene in the bathtub scene when he's shirtless.
Yeah. Oh, he's Stone Fox, man, with the
Pretty
wig on.
handsome.
Yeah.
He looked good.
Yeah.
He looked real good.
But it's also it's a pretty, you know, and I think this is true of like a lot of stuff that becomes impactful to a certain generation, like, you know, Dawn of the Dead or something like that. The message is pretty digestible. It's not a children's fairy tale, but it's a pretty straightforward fable.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Where I couldn't tell you what Tommy's about now at age 53, but this is like,
I don't think they could tell you what it was about.
Yeah. It's Phantom is a classic story, classically told at the end of the day too,
Right.
which makes it sort of like, which for a little soft 12-year-old brain, it's a kind of perfect magic bullet.
And you're right. And, you know, when he shows up as the Phantom when he gets out of jail, it's like you have someone to root for, and you have this just weird cultish superhero all of a sudden with a weird voice box, and you're just like, no, don't listen to Swan. Come on. You're smarter than this. Don't do this. But I wanted to talk to you about the introduction of Beef. Like when Beef comes in, it's so smart to introduce a character like him. Beef just comes out of nowhere. Like, this is the future. And it seems like such a funny middle finger to glam rock, heavy metal, hard rock. You know, it's like, which you haven't heard in the film up to this point. You know, it's mostly been like, a Beach Boys kind of song, or a 50s doo-wop kind of thing, or, you know, Jessica Harper sings her song, or there's a piano ballad. So now it's like, oh, yeah, rock and roll, hard rock and roll.
I mean, I thought about Meatloaf right away because of the age I was, and my parents liked Meatloaf, and we listened to him a lot.
Uh-huh.
So I immediately thought of, like, again, Rocky Horror. My references were like Rocky Horror. It kind of reminded me of Frankenfurter or whatever, and Meatloaf in. Not really Meatloaf, but, you know, it was like I couldn't not think of him. They don't look alike, but they're kind of like there's chains, maybe. You know, there's like some weird things that my brain tried to put together, but ultimately he does that flexing thing, and you look at him, you just go, I don't care what the deal is, I want more of this guy.
Yes.
And every line he says is incredible.
He's presented as this delicious kind of, you know, confection, and every scene with him is great. But it is funny that the movie presents hard rock as a bad thing.
Right.
Yes.
Like, this is when music gets dumb.
Well,
here is it.
Yeah.
Here it is.
I had only been to one rock concert at this point when I saw this film, right? So it was still new to me, right? The idea of going to see something in a concert setting seemed a little scary. And this film did no favors to me in terms of being like the scene where they're pulling out audience members and, you know, cutting their head off or their arm. I had no idea. I was like,
going to say that.
Watching the film, I took it so literally. Like, I was like, oh, they're actually killing people to do it. Because, you know, like, you'd hear these things about like Death Race 2000 or Rollerball, and you would build it into your mind of this, like, oh my God, it's the end of civilization. Everything's going, like, they kill the audience, and the audience is screaming and applauding. But yeah, I took it so literally when I saw it at such a young age of like, wow, the audience is cool with them just being slaughtered, you know? So it left such an impression.
I couldn't tell when I was a kid. I remember thinking, is it just bad effects that the movie had, that they're supposed to look like a real person and we're supposed to believe it, but we could tell it's a dummy or whatever. But then right. As I got older, I was like, oh no, this is part of the performance. And then I thought, like, why don't people do these performances like this all the time? Like pulling an art, like making it look like they chopped off an audience's arm, audience member's arm. It was just like so cool. It was just like,
Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah, the editing's so funny because it is like, it shows like somebody real in the audience, and then it's like a mannequin head.
Right out of the department store, yeah.
But as a kid, if it was, I wouldn't have been surprised. I just thought it was part of the fun of this movie. Was just like, oh, movies I watched, they would use a watermelon as a head and they would smack. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I was watching so many way lower tier, mostly trauma movies, and like, just seeing that was just visually so pleasing. Period. It was just like so fun and scary, but in a way that was exciting.
Yeah, I also think it's really hard in films that are in a concert setting to make the audience feel that frenetic and alive, because they're shooting it over and over again and resetting, and oftentimes you see films where they're like, oh, they haven't shown the audience in a while, like like Rock and Roll High School. I guess the audience was getting so pissed while they're shooting it because it was they paid to go see a Ramones show, and they're like, we're resetting, they're gonna do the same 5 songs, but don't worry kids, at the end he's gonna come out and do some songs for you, they're gonna do it. And just to have the patience to just be like, all right, everyone reset. Now lose your mind again and again.
Yeah, you almost believe that it was presented to them in real life the way that they presented in the movie. Like, this is going to be the greatest performance you're ever going to see. And then they really did, even as an audience member acting on a set, like, that must have been insane to watch, even over and over again, at least for a little bit. I mean, it's just like, it's such a magnificent, every movement, is just like so exciting.
And I like that by the end, the audience is part of the show. They're tripping balls or whatnot, but they're climbing onto the stage and taking part in the murder and the mayhem. Like it gets completely like the line between audience and performer gets completely blurred, which is, an interesting wrinkle.
Well, at the end, when they do the wedding scene and the death scenes, there is that character. There's one actor
Scarf.
who, yes, do you know what I'm talking about? Who just takes over the film and is like, when Winslow's crawling on the ground, he's down on the ground. Yeah. I found out about that person's story. Do you know anything about this guy?
I remember hearing it once and I've forgotten. So please.
So his name was William Shepard, and he in the credits it says Rock Freak, and I guess he was instrumental to the choreography at the end too, with the black swans and everything. But originally he was part of a performance called Dionysus in '69 that William Finley was also part of, that DePalma filmed. And this was like a place where you come in to see the performance. There's no chairs. You have to either sit on the floor or lean against the wall or be part of the stage. And they basically were like, there's no separation between audience and theater, and we're going to try to bring people in to their comfort level. And I guess people were like, doing all sorts of rituals and getting naked, and they were going out into the street. And this person was really pivotal, I guess, in that performance. It was one of those things where every time I watched it, I was like, is that a fluke? Like, do they know that we're kind of just watching this guy, this glam dancer, instead of like this person dying? Like, we're watching the hero die. It's just such a scene stealer. I was kind of glad that I could find anything about them. It took a while. There's not a lot of information, but he represents such a great moment of, again, no separation between the audience, the story, the stage, everything you've seen. We're just melting it all together now.
Yeah. And his contribution gets a little bit diminished when in the VHS era, when we're watching it growing up, because we're looking at the cropped frame, you know what I mean? And I think he kind of becomes more prominent when you're looking at it in the original aspect ratio, as we're able to do now. And the end song is so great as an ending song, but this is an old piece of trivia, but the final song, The Hell of It, was originally composed for Beef's funeral, which didn't get filmed or got filmed and cut out. And if you listen to the song, like the scene was supposed to end with a little girl trying to audition for Swan at the funeral and tap dancing on Beef's coffin. And so you can kind of, when you listen to the song, you can still hear her tapping, which is very funny.
Wow.
But like that was supposed to happen, because the movie kind of hurries up to that finale. Like Beef gets electrocuted,
It does.
and then we're getting married and on live TV. But there was originally there was supposed to be a funeral for Beef in there.
Also, I think Beef's death is one of the most glorious cinematic deaths. I think it looks so cool. I'm always just like, that is so cool looking how they shot and edited that in the herky jerky strobe thing. I'm just
did they like chop the film and flip each right or something like that?
They did that by hand with the work print. It wasn't filmed a certain way, but it was like repeating and inserting black and taking the frames out of order, old school.
Oh, it's so impressive. This film rules. I'm sorry. It's so simple. Obviously, we're geeking out, but like, it's just, there's so many great, again, you can break down the film and be like, oh, when they're shooting his studio at the record plant, and he's got the Tonto synthesizers around, that looks amazing. The Paradise looks amazing.
When he's getting his voice tuned and he's like, Dolby's, and he's putting it.
It's my favorite scene in the movie when Winslow's trying to sing and his voice is destroyed, and Swan basically turns his voice into Paul Williams' voice. It's so perverse and so sad.
He's tweaking all the knobs.
It's so cool.
Yeah, and you could hear it. You could hear like the voice is kind of bad and rough, and then you hear it, like really do hear it morph into Paul Williams kind of, and then it's just like Paul Williams through the microphone and mask, and like it's just so eerie but like effective, and everything about it sounds good. It's cool, it's exciting as a kid. Like
as a 12-year-old, it's not even campy. It made me sad. Like, oh, this guy lost his voice, and then the guy who caused it is giving him his voice, and it was so perverse, something so tragic about it.
Yeah, I agree. It made me really sad too.
He doesn't have a way out. And you're like, how come nobody's helping him? It's like he's so alone in this world that there is nobody who cares.
This film was scripted and shot prior to an event occurring that created legal problems for this film. And for the whole story, you have to go to Swan Archives. It's run by my buddy Ari Kahan. Ari, I apologize in advance for getting this wrong, but this film was basically in the can, and then someone realized that Led Zeppelin owned the copyright on Swan Song, right? So they went to Led Zeppelin and said, hey, can we, innocent mistake, blah, 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 can we do this? But Led Zeppelin had a manager or an agent in their sphere who also represented a guy named Leslie Harvey, who actually did get electrocuted to death on stage.
Oh, right.
And the manager felt like this film was making fun of Leslie Harvey. And DePalma showed up with the receipts. I wrote this before that happened, this and that. Like, it was not an intentional thing. And this guy was not having it. And so they were kind of banned or got a cease and desist or some kind of legal notice that they needed to remove all references to Swan Song. So if you'll watch the film, you'll notice, like, for example, when Beef gets introduced at the airport, Paul Williams is standing at a podium. That podium used to say Swan Song, but now a very bad optical is sitting there floating around. That's the bird and it's Death Records. There are some very nice tracking shots that had to get cut to pieces in this movie to cut around the Swan Song signage. There's a couple of stuff that sneaks in here and there. I think the record press has a Swan Song like verbiage in it, but the film got kind of hastily chopped up at the last minute because of that. And my buddy Ari, who I mentioned, runs this thing called Swan Archives. He restored at his own expense and through years of hunting down, he's restored the film to the state before it got cut up.
What?
And I've had the privilege of seeing that restoration, and it's very satisfying because I know it's like it was Ari's White Whale, and he spent so long doing it. I don't think that the movie you can watch right now is in any way really compromised. I think it's still a classic film. It's the film the only version we've known.
Right.
But it is kind
Death Records is cool.
Death Records is cool.
When you want more of something so badly, even if it's slightly different, I want to watch the whole thing. You know, I want to see it. I had I don't have one complaint with the movie that I've grown up with. Every version of every VHS I've watched, I'm happy with it.
Yeah, but it's part of this lifelong mission of like, I've watched something so many times, like you said, you know it by heart, right? How can I engage with this piece of content. I hate the word content, but how could I engage with this art in a new way? And Ari showed up with like this restoration. I was like, oh my God.
Wow.
It
well,
was
you know
special.
what that means is we have to take his restoration and put it back to the original film that I've seen, just to add another layer to it. Be like, I've seen your restoration. It's great. But now I want to take your restoration and I want to put back the original imagery over yours.
Yeah, it becomes an immersive
great
experience
expense and passion. Yeah, exactly.
Edit
That's
your own movie.
incredible. What an amazing thing. It just shows how this film is it just gets in you.
This movie put an itch in Ari that took him 45 years to scratch, and he did it. And it's like you say, it's a testament to the power of this movie.
Well, at the end of every episode, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on the film we're talking about. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many body parts ripped from the audience members do you give this film? On a scale of 1 body part ripped off an audience member to 10.
I definitely give it 10 body parts ripped off of an audience member. Easily.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna. It's the movie I've seen maybe more than any other movie at this point in my life, and I can't imagine giving it anything less than the highest grade possible. I got to go 10.
That's what I have here too. 10 body parts ripped off the audience members is the correct answer. No, I thank you both for being on here. This film is incredible. It means so much to me too. Fangoria has been around how long now?
45 years.
45 years, and kudos to you for, it's available in print form. I love that. And Perry, I love you too. Congrats on everything, all your success and all the work you do.
Love you, dude. Thanks.
This was a total treat for me. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a treat and a half.
10 body parts.
Yes. I want electrocuted beef.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday. We are a completely independently produced affair, so the best way to support us is to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app and to subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get exclusive weekly bonus episodes every Sunday, as well as one-of-a-kind handmade Revolutions Per Movie goods that I send out to you. You can follow the show on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and find more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!